Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the AZ 900 Azure Fundamentals training course. So to get started, I'm going to get everyone to introduce themselves, tell us a bit about themselves, something small, and we'll go from there. Again, my name is Matthew Browne. Thank you for joining us, obviously. After this training session, we will have a customer survey for you to fill out of any feedback that you may have. Throughout this session, we're going to be talking about Microsoft certification, the fundamentals of Azure, and the labs that can be done to help prepare yourself for exam success. To start off with, I'm going to ask everyone to confirm they can hear me, and if you can just raise your hand, that would be great. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks a million. Okay, great. Next, we're going to start off by I'm going to give a quick introduction. My name is Matthew Browne. I'm a cybersecurity solutions architect, worked in IT for the last 10 years in core infrastructure, and I train people in both CompTIA and Microsoft certifications. I am also a CompTIA subject matter expert and a Microsoft MVP. So what we will do is we'll get everyone to tell us about themselves. Dan, if you wouldn't mind starting first.
Sure. My name's Dan Ray. I am with Cloud First, and I am a IT professional working on various projects for the company. And typically that would be on-premises technologies and looking to get into some of their cloud-based offerings. I'm familiar with the basics of Azure, but would love to learn more about it. And my expectations are hearing a little bit about your experience, Matthew, especially the security side of things. That interests me quite a bit.
Awesome, Dan. That's brilliant. Solomon, will you introduce yourselves, please?
He's on mute.
Solomon, I think you're on mute. If you just want to
Sorry
try and
about that.
unmute.
Yeah,
No problem.
yeah. My name is Solomon Jeremiah. I'm also an IT professional, and I enjoy learning. And one of the reasons I'm here is because I want to learn and know more about Azure, and also learning from someone like Matthew. I think it will be a pleasure for me to learn from him. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks a million, Solomon. June, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So this is Juan Pablo. I am a system administrator focused on on-premise solutions, and I just enrolled to this course because I want to start certifying myself in Microsoft technologies, and I think that you are the best guys to do this. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, June. Frank, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, how you doing? My name is Frank Falvey, and I worked in the IT sector for over 20 years, mainly with Dell. And I'm here today to learn from Matthew more about Azure. And yeah, Matthew is a good teacher, so that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Durkin. I'm an IT professional with a number of years' experience, mostly in Active Directory and on-premise Exchange environments. I've also got some experience with Office 365. The reason I'm here for this course is to see how those skills can transfer to the Azure space. I have a basic knowledge of it, but obviously want to learn a lot more.
Awesome, Michael. Thank you very much. So you're welcome. Thanks for everyone for joining our session. Just to give a quick recap, everybody would have received a course description and product overview, which would have described the 3 areas we're going to cover in our session today, which is cloud concepts, Azure architecture and services, and management and governance. So the purpose of this document is just to give everybody a more rounded understanding of the course data sheet and what it covers. It also goes into a bit more detail on, the introduction to Azure, going through high availability infrastructure as a service, and more in-depth knowledge on Azure networking and compute. You would have also received a sample guide on the assessment guide for the Azure fundamentals, which would have provided you with a copy of the learning paths for the 3 concepts, and also sample answers and questions, just so you can go through that in your own time. So without further ado, we'll move on to the next session, and that is just an overview: class hours, restrooms, phones, messages, and internet access. So obviously during the class, if for any reason you need to answer a phone or use the restroom or text or call anyone, please do so, but just remember to mute your mic for others. If you need to use the restroom, please do. You don't need to ask for any excuse to leave. Just turn off your mic and camera while you're gone. Internet access is allowed throughout the course, and you can feel free to ask any questions that you may need to do so. So just to give an idea, the course covers the fundamentals knowledge in Azure. The audience for this is someone who's going to be focusing on getting started in Azure. It's a 1-day course, and it's recommended that you have a background in IT. The paths again are the cloud concepts, the Azure architecture and services, and management and governance. So far, the exam is weighed out at 25 to 30% for cloud concepts, 35 to 40 for architect and services, and Azure management services and governance is 30 to 35. Included in this course is the Microsoft Learn Sandbox. That has been provided to everyone with their own tests account, which they can log in and play around with Azure and create apps and services. As part of our demonstration, we're going to look at creating resource groups and resources within that today, just to give you a fundamental understanding of it. So cloud computing, what is it? We're going to be looking at the responsibility models, capital versus OpEx, expenditure, the types of infrastructure as a service platform, and software as a service. The next thing we're going to be looking at is how cloud computing is documented in this course. So the objectives are: define cloud models, include public, private, and hybrid, identify appropriate use cases for each cloud model, describe the consumption-based, and compare cloud pricing models. And we'll do this in kind of a 50-50 split of going through some course material, and we'll also actually expose you to the Azure console. Cloud computing is, by definition, the delivery of computing and services over the internet. It's compute, networking, and storage. We're going to have a more in-depth look as the course goes on into the responsibility model. For now, this is something that can be read over in your own time and reviewed. Obviously, pay good attention to software, platform, and infrastructure, and learn where the responsibility model applies for both Microsoft, the customer, and the shared responsibility. Private cloud, organizations create a cloud environment in their data center. Here we go through who's responsible for operating these services and who provides access to users outside of the organizations. Again, this will be covered in the lab module. For public cloud, we're going to go through what public cloud is, who it's owned by, the resources and services that are provided by multiple organizations and users. And we're also going to look at how the public cloud is accessed, typically over the internet. And of course, we have the hybrid cloud environments, which are the combined public and private clouds to allow applications to run either in your on-premise infrastructure, which a few of our students here have plenty of exposure to, and how that can incorporate into the cloud environment. So we'll go through hybrid cloud in more detail. As part of the exam, you're expected to know the differences between public, private, and hybrid. You're expected to understand CapEx and OpEx as part of this, and you're expected to understand the security, compliance, and legal requirements of the tree. We're not going to go into detail right now, but this is something that would be asked comparing the CapEx and OpEx expenditures. Just take a minute to have a look at this slide and let me know if you have any questions, please. Please raise your hand if you do as well. Thank you. Hi, Dan. Thanks for that. I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, so Azure, we would get out of the capital expense of servers, of maintaining our server room, those types of expenses, correct?
Sorry, Dan, I think your connection just dropped there for a sec. Will you just repeat that?
Yeah, with Azure, we would get out of the capital expense of like our server room and servers, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah. So capital expenditure is what you'd spend on-premise infrastructure, and that is what you'd spend right now to buy that infrastructure. And if you decide to go for a OpEx model, you're going for a pay-as-you-go service rather than upfront costs, immediate investment into a piece of kit, and you have the option to deprovision those as time goes on. So yeah, CapEx is on-premise, you buy it now, and that's your investment, and you go from there with it. Michael, I see you've raised your hand as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the OpEx model. So when you select the services you want to run, do you need to commit to a certain period of time that you need to run those services? So for, let's say, year's commitment or something like that.
Yeah. So good question, Michael. So Azure operates a pay-as-you-go model as well as a reserved instance. So if you go for pay-as-you-go model, you're going to get billed immediately on what you use. So if you set up multiple VMs, you have them spec'd out using the Azure cost calculator. And when you're doing that process, you're going to have the option to maybe go 1, 2, or 3 year reserve. And if you choose that, that's the cost savings you're going to have. But if you go pay as you go, you're still going to be billed immediately for those services. So while you can get a reduced rate, you still will be required to pay that amount upfront, versus if you went with a sorry, I'm just after drawing a blank. Versus if you went with a service that you spread over monthly payments. So you might go with something like a 3-year instance, and that will save you money, and you won't have to pay that immediately. That'll be a monthly spend. So that should cover that. But again, we'll go through that more. Perfect. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll move on to the next slide, which is consumption-based model. Again, we spoke about this just there, which means what it is better cost protection, priced for individual resources and services, and billing is based on actual usage rather than predicted usage. Cloud benefits is the next domain. We're going to be discussing about high availability and scalability. You'll be looking at the reliability of the cloud and the predictability, and we'll also be looking at security and governance and managing cloud and its benefits. So cloud benefits include high availability, scalability, predictability, and governance. We also have elasticity, reliability, security, and manageability. Included in cloud types, again, we're going back to the basics: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. Has anyone got any examples they could use for these three? No? Nervous. Okay, all right. Michael, yes, I see you have your hands up. Go for it.
Software as a service would be something like Office 365, maybe?
Yeah,
Would that be
that's
correct?
correct. Yeah, yeah. And platform as a service? Solomon, yeah.
Platform as a service will be like we could use web applications.
Yeah, that's correct. And anybody know anything about infrastructure as a service? June?
I suppose the virtual machines, VPNs, anything related with anything that we can create in Azure.
Yeah, correct, perfect. Okay, so just to go over that again, infrastructure as a service is build pay-as-you-go IT infrastructure. You're renting the servers, virtual machines, storage, and operating systems from the cloud provider. So essentially, with infrastructure as a service, what you might have on-prem, where you go, you spec out your server, you purchase that server based off your spec, you set it up on your on-prem environment. You're not essentially doing that here. What you're doing is you're renting the space out. So you might purchase servers and storage and different networking and firewalls, but it's actually all rented and it's hosted on the cloud provider's platform. So infrastructure as a service, again, build pay-as-you-go IT infrastructure by renting servers, virtual machines, and storage. So that just gives a quick overview of that. Platform as a service, it provides an environment for building, testing, and deploying software applications without focusing on managing underlying infrastructure. So for platform as a service, you may have servers and storage, networking, firewalls and security there. You might also have physical data centers. You might also have operating systems and development tools and database management analytic tools there as well. So infrastructure as a service, servers and storage. Platform as a service is your operating system. So the differentiating thing against them is one is clearly infrastructure, your server, and one platform is your operating system. So example, you might buy a HP server, but which is your infrastructure as a service, but your platform as a service is going to be your operating system, which might be your Windows 10 or your Windows 11, just for that. Again, software as a service, users connect to and use the cloud-based apps over an internet, for example, Microsoft Office 365, email, and calendars. June had previously mentioned this a few minutes ago, where he had said you might use Office 365 for software as a service. So the three tiers here, where you have IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, kind of give you an example of how it looks, the model here, and it kind of covers the basis of these three services. Any questions on this? No, perfect. Okay. Again, you're going to be asked to do a cloud service comparison, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. You're going to be asked to compare these with each other. Again, I'll provide additional information to support this learning for you at the end of the class, and you can take away these slides, which will help with kind of testing yourselves and stuff. So, knowledge check. What I'd normally do here is we'd poll in the students. So I'd ask you something you might have learned in this slide. So I might say to Dan, what's infrastructure as a service?
That's cloud provided servers or operating systems, either
Awesome.
Microsoft or others, right?
Yeah, awesome. Absolutely. Solomon, I might ask you what software as a service is.
Okay, software as a service is more like the one that you do not really need to worry about the underlying machines, servers, and all of that. You just pay. It's based on license, like Office 365. You just go access it through the web portal.
Awesome. And Michael, I might ask you what platform as a service is.
Platform as a service is where you don't worry about any of the underlying hardware or operating systems and just have control of something like, for example, a web server or an application.
Perfect. Perfect. Awesome. So that kind of covers everything you're going to have in your learning path, which is your first one, shared responsibility models, public, private, and hybrid, and the benefits of cloud computing and cloud services. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at Azure. So for Azure, you're going to go to portal.azure.com. So when you go to Azure and you log into your account, on the top right, you're going to see your username and you'll have the option to switch directories. So just make sure you're logged into the correct account there. So one of the main things in Azure is creating resource groups. So you can see from here, we have some already. So these are just some resource groups. And you can also see we have an Azure subscription, which is a Microsoft sponsorship. So if we go and if we want to host something in our Azure environment, we're going to create a resource group. The resource group, we're going to create it and we're going to put it in one of our subscriptions. So I'm going to choose this subscription. We're going to give that resource group a name. So we might call this tests server environment. Usually you're going to create this based off what you want to call it. Example, you might be hosting a website in here, so you might call it website 01, or you might call it your example Focus IT for us, or Journey to the Cloud, or something. So you're going to call your resource group something you're going to understand to be able to document in later stages. The next thing we're going to see is we're going to look at the region. So it's really important that if you're, especially for geographical and legal reasons, you're going to want to put this in the West Europe region in Ireland, if that's where you want to store your data. So for us, we store it in West Europe, so we're going to put it in there. So the next thing we're going to do is for here, you can assign a tag. A tag allows you basically to build the resource responsibly. So for the tag, you might put in finance, because this might be something for the finance department. So when you put that in, and you might give it a value, in this case, I'm not going to, we're just going to give it a name, finance. And we're going to put that in there. So when the billing is done at the end of the month, it's going to be charged to the finance department. So when you have those options put in, you're going to see a validation passed, and then you're going to click create the resource group. So once that resource group is created, we can see here on the top right, it says resource group created. We're going to go into our test server environment. Within this, we can see we've no resources. So a company has asked you to set up an SQL server for their environment. This is something that happens on a regular basis, and you need it to be spec'd out correctly. So you've done your Azure cost calculation. So if you're doing your Azure cost calculator, you're going to go over to the Microsoft website and you're going to go to the Azure cost calculator. In further sessions, we're going to go through this in more detail, but just to give you a flavor of what we're doing here, I'm going to set up a SQL server. and we're going to put it in this resource group. So you can go into the resource group and create it this way, or what a lot of people do is if you're setting up an SQL server and you need SQL built into it, you might go to what's known as the marketplace. So when you go to the marketplace, you're going to type in server, you're going to choose your edition, which might be server 2019. Sometimes you might get the correct one up, sometimes you might not. So I will type in SQL. So SQL server. If I want to put this into an easier way of doing it, I'm going to type SQL server and make sure you have the space in there. And I'm going to choose SQL Server 2019 on Windows Server 2019 because that's what we're going to want to do. So when you do the Windows Server 2019, you're going to have to choose an option here. So you might have SQL Server 2019 standard with the database only, or you might have a developer, which is a free SQL Server license on Windows Server. For our case, usually it's going to be this one, free SQL Server. But for an organization, you might have an enterprise or you might have a standard Windows Server. So we're going to choose this option for the demo purposes. So that's a free SQL Server license, SQL developer on Windows Server 2019. We're going to create that, okay? So some interesting things to note here. The first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put it in a resource group. So we can see our test server environment is in there. We're going to give it a name. We're going to call it SQL VM-test. So we know that's an SQL server, it's VM, and it's a test system. We're going to put it in West Europe. And for the moment, we're not going to have any redundancy. We're going to always choose the trusted launch virtual machine to make sure it is it's not at your basic level. And also, this is often chosen in organizations because it's a Gen 2 virtual machine. So again, so free SQL license with Windows Server Developer on 2019. We're going to have our architecture. Most importantly here, we're going to look at what you will see is the size. So standard, a lot of people have, what Microsoft do is they give you an idea of the different most popular use sizes in Azure. If for me, which is what I choose for most VMs, I'm going to be looking at the D series V5 because you're going to want an SQL server that has a bit of power to it. You might have a few concurrent users connecting in. So what I tend to do is I tend to go for maybe a D8 AS V5 series, which will give you a decent enough spec server. What you're looking at here is you're looking for the amount of virtual CPUs. You're looking at the amount of RAM you're going to need. And you're also looking at the max IOPS that will be required for the server. So just remember, it's better to spec it up a bit more than you need rather than speccing it lower and having to fix that in the longer run. Because if you spec it up, you won't usually have to go too low, especially with SQL. So I'm going to choose the D8 AS V5 series. I'm going to choose select. We're going to type in a username. We're going to call this test. So for the username, we might actually go for this one, user 101, and we'll put in the password and make sure the password's secure and you've used it and you document this password, and that's lovely. So before we go on to the next thing, before we create this, we're also going to want to have a look at the disk type. We're going to want to make sure usually if we're doing an SQL, you might want a premium SSD. You can go with standard SSDs, but premium would be better for this. Standard HDDs wouldn't be a good idea because you you could possibly have performance issues. And of course, Microsoft have recently brought out their own redundant premium SSDs and standard SSDs there. So we're going to make sure that's premium SSD. So for our networking side, we're going to ensure that the virtual network selected is the test environment. We're going to choose our subnet if we have an existing one. If not, Azure will create it for you. And we're going to obviously choose if we want a public IP. We can put that in there. Now, Azure, this doesn't actually require to be connected to the internet in that way that you'd need to access it. So we're going to make sure we choose no public IP. And we're also going to make sure that the public inbound ports are not allowed. If you allow them on RDP, you will have this exposed to the internet. So that's going to be a no for us. Where required, you can also delete the NIC for the VM after it's created. Ensure accelerated networking is up there, and if you want, you can place the virtual machine behind a load balancer. So for the moment, we're not going to do that. We're just going to also check that the management settings are all correct. Note here that it has said this image does not support login with Azure AD. So if that's the case and we're looking to make this a Windows server, we're going to need to adjust that. Okay, so we're going to just go down here and we might choose we're just going to go see all images and we're going to change this. So we're going to go SQL server again. So if you've chosen the wrong image, now is a good time to fix it. So SQL server on Windows Server 2019. And we're going to choose SQL Server 2019 standard on Windows Server, or you can go with Enterprise. So in this case, we're just going to go with Enterprise. It has told us here that it's not compatible with security type, trusted launch volume. So you need to change that where you get that message. So you want it to be a Gen 2. We're going to go back and we're going to choose Server SQL. We're going to hit select on the same one again. And we're going to choose SQL Server, Windows Server Enterprise 2019. You're not going to want the database. You're going to want the Gen 2. So eventually we might find that. There you go. So SQL Server, Windows Server 2019. There's our Enterprise Windows Server 2019 with SQL. So now that we've done that, we're going to just ensure that, oh yeah. So if you still get this message, you can try and do it through when it's built. It just could be a case of I mightn't have an AD set up on this account at the moment. So monitoring, good option to enable your monitoring. If you have rules, you can set your threshold. And once you do that, you'll get alerted to the email address on file. If you don't need it, you can take it off. Then we're going to usually advance. You don't need to make any changes here for the moment. We're going to just double check the SQL Server settings. Storage, really handy to note here that if you're creating an SQL server, Azure will automatically change this to a terabyte of storage. You're going to want to change your disk type to a 256 gig. Okay. You're also going to want to change the logs. You might only need 128 gig there. I would never recommend making any changes here unless you actually need to. You can see Azure notifies you of the selected drive supports up to 0 MB currently, temp database and log files. So to make your life easier, what you can do is set system to the newly created storage. I'd be setting that as part of the setup. Your temp database, you can use a local SSD or share the log drive for the temp DB or share the data drive. So you can choose where you want to store the temp DB. In our case, we're just going to change it to the data drive for the moment. Once you have all that in there, you're going to want to click OK. And we're also going to want to double check that this is correct. So collections, max IOPS, all that kind of good stuff. Okay, so once you've done all that and you've created everything, you're going to want to hit review and create. So you've done your basics, you've done your disk, you've done your networking, and once that creates, Azure will go through the process of creating the resources within that group. Okay, you'll see it takes a minute to validate, it passes the validation, and you go create, and Azure will do that. So that's really interesting to note that that's how you could set up an SQL server with Windows Server 2019, and Azure will do everything for you. It will begin the deployment, and after about 5 minutes, you will see those resources in there. If we go back to resource groups and we go test server environment, we currently see nothing in here yet. It's currently deploying. So once it deploys, we will see items in there. Have you any questions on anything there? I know we'll be going through on follow-up session with this to do some practicals. So just, yeah, perfect. June, any questions?
So, yeah, when you were creating the virtual machine, you didn't add any tag, okay?
I did, yeah.
But in theory, this virtual machine is included into the resource group where you added the finance tag, okay?
Yes, yeah.
So, because the virtual machine is in the same resource group, so do we need to apply any other tag for the billing point of view? Okay, I'm
Yeah,
talking about
correct. So usually when you're going through this, you would apply the finance tag to the rest of the resources. That's usually something I do as I'm building it. But for this scenario, I just wanted to build a base system so you could see how you're actually going to do it without having to build each individual element. So like you didn't have to choose your separate disk storage or your network or any of that. So for the moment, I've just gone through the wizard for creating an SQL server with all the elements put in on it. I haven't added tags, but that is something you would normally do. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions for me on that? No. Okay. So typical with Microsoft, as we can see, it takes a bit of time to create the deployment. I'm just going to refresh there because we can see it is creating it. So we can see there's our SQL VM, our virtual machine. We can see that's our network security group. We can also see that's our NIC for it. We can see these are the disks we created for it. One being the database, one being the temp database, and one being the logs. And we can also see the VNet is in there for that. So while that hasn't completed fully yet, that just gives you an idea of what of how to create a resource within your resource group and deploy a server, example SQL, with the SQL software installed on it. Again, you can go into more detail with this. There's plenty that we'll be doing as part of this course. Just to give an idea of something else that we might touch on is we might look at creating a domain controller where we have our public IP, our security group set up, our interfaces, our disk, our virtual network. And of course, if you want to go down the route of SQL, where you might have an app running, where we're going to go through the process of setting up the database on Azure, and we're also going to look at setting up your app service plans, your front door, and how all of that works with Azure. So this kind of marks the first segment of the class. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a 10-minute break. Have we any further questions before we finish this segment? No? Perfect. Okay. All right, guys. So you can take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back shortly. For now, that will do for the class. Thank you.